Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee, and with me of course is Milly.
Hi.
We have Sophie.
Hey.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Libby Ward. Thank you so much for joining.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. So the people watching this will probably recognize your name from the titles of Be Cool Scooby Doo, which is an incredible show that's been seeing a resurgence in popularity over the last couple of weeks, to say the least. So it's an incredible pleasure to have you here. But going forward to the start of your career, kind of backtracking a bit, I know from IMDb that you've been a writer, producer, and director. And so I'm curious to know, at the early stages before your career, was doing all those three aspects always part of your plan, or did one kind of lead to the other?
I think things always lead into each other just by virtue of trying to follow projects that are creative and interesting and fun and people who are fun to work with. And in some cases, the credits are just different depending on whether you work in animation or recreation shows or live action or podcasting. Like an animation, story editor comes up a lot as a job that might be called a producer in recreation television. So yeah, I just always want to be working on something creative and interesting with creative and fun people.
That's amazing. And in terms of, getting into the career and, any one of those job titles, really, was there any movies or shows that you watched growing up that kind of made you want to go down this route?
Yeah, I'm a huge Muppet fan. So following Henson and animation in general, all the Jay Ward stuff, the Rocky and Bullwinkle, all the Warner Brothers stuff, of course, Scooby Doo, of course, the Jetsons and the Flintstones and all of the excellent Disney stuff. Just with puppeteering and even more so with animation, the sky's the limit as far as what you can bring to life. So, if you want to have conversations with your toaster or with a delightful frog who plays the banjo, then those things can happen pretty simply, given the options for those media.
That's awesome. Do you recall how you got your first writing job and what the experience was like?
Well, it's almost hard to remember what would qualify as a first writing job. But I would say that my first biggest staff job was on Sex Sent Me to the ER, which is a very silly recreation show on TLC, where people would tell their stories about having had to go to the ER, after or during or because of sex. A lot of times it wasn't because of sex. They were having sex and, the art fell off the wall and gave them a concussion or something like that. But that I was actually the supervising writer on that, but that was probably the one where I had the most episodes. We were basically doing 3 episodes a week. So myself and the team, and just sort of cranking it all out. And that was very lovely and fun and weird. And I would say the majority of my jobs before, which would probably qualify more as firsts, were much smaller individual producers or advertising agencies where I just sat quietly in a room by myself at home and, knocked out a few pages or even a whole feature film worth of copy, but without really getting to hang out with anybody or be in an office per se. And all of those options are fun and interesting and fun versions of writing, but it's nice to see people and get to, joke and do bits.
Yeah, that does seem like the perfect type of wacky comedy that is very much along the lines of Be Cool Scooby Doo, except possibly a bit more on the riskier side than Scooby Doo, but definitely will be worth checking that out. But just adding on to your list of credits, apart from the ones that I said previously, you're also an author and an illustrator of Luchador Mice, which I went on the website for, and it looks amazing. But what was your kind of inspiration to write and illustrate that?
Well, I think in terms of seeing everything in the world as an anthropomorphic creature, gadget, whatever, I guess, maybe weird creatives spend a lot of time not only talking to themselves, but talking to their car, or talking to their pets. Of course, most of us do. I mean, most of my friends do. I don't know if most of us in the world do, but I was in this area of Hollywood, and there was a vintage store that had luchador masks in the window, and there was a mouse. We were closed. It was like midnight, and there was a little mouse in the window with the luchador masks. And I always sort of worry about critters, especially critters that people consider vermin, mice and rats, or squirrels, even sometimes pigeons, because, I don't want them in my house either, but I also don't want them murdered. So I sort of had a little empathy for this mouse, and was like, I hope you get yourself out of sight, or out of the building, better yet, before everybody opens in the morning. But you'll probably be okay, because you're obviously a luchadora, because all those masks were in the window. And then that sort of sent me down the road of what does it look like if mice, or animals in general, are lucha libre wrestlers. And dormice, as I'm sure you guys are more familiar with in the UK than we are in the United States, dormice are a little more like a cross between a mouse and a squirrel, and they're extra sleepy. And the portmanteau of luchador and dormice was so cute to me that I just started building that world. And my family, I've had family in Guadalajara, Mexico, and a lot of family in Tucson. And of course, I live in Los Angeles, so a lot of that American Southwest and Mexico. And a lot of us speak a lot of Spanglish, where we sort of smush together the Spanish and the English words. And so when I was working on the book, it just felt natural that the dormice and the book would be in Spanglish also.
Yes, yeah, I was definitely gonna ask about that, because on the website for Luchador Mice, it states that, with its nature of being bilingual, a part of that was to encapsulate the spirit of inclusion. So kind of apart from what you just mentioned, like, can you expand upon, I guess, what that means both narratively and I guess in terms of your process when writing?
Yeah, I think, well, capturing the spirit of inclusion is always important to me in all cases. And there are so many really interesting cultural differences that we all share, both, whether we come directly from a country or we're many generations past. My family largely comes from Ireland and Scotland and England, so I'm pretty white. But I've also spent a lot of time living in Hawaii and living in Italy, which has many different cultural ideas and traditions, and Greece, which is also has a lot of deep history. America is so young compared to nearly every country in the rest of the world. And living in Los Angeles and New York, where it's a giant melting pot, and you have so many different fun ideas. And so being able to embrace and explore those, particularly when I write with other people, and we can sort of combine our traditions and our nerdiness and our senses of humor for hopefully maximum fun, is really enjoyable to me. Not to mention, representation is exciting to the audience, right? It's nice to be able to see yourself in things. And I think, as a side note to the bilingual nature of the book, there are lots of books and other media, movies and television and the like, that do a sort of more of a little more aggressive of a teaching, where it'll do a sentence in English and then the same sentence in Spanish. And I wrote my book to combine them, because of course, a lot of times we sort of learn things not exactly by osmosis, but by proximity, right? Like, the more you hear something, you catch on to it, and maybe you start to use it. Like, I love to say cheers, or end my emails with cheers, because it just sounds like a more of a jubilant salutation, I guess. And it's not that common in the US, but I have enough friends who do it that I kind of caught on. And because the book is combined Spanish and English, actually rhymes Spanish and English, I think of it as being the same way that we'd learn a word from C.S. Lewis or J.K. Rowling or Lewis Carroll, that have made up words for their world specifically. Like, we wouldn't all just say muggle if we hadn't heard it thousands of times in the Harry Potter canon. So by using words that are maybe of a language we don't understand very well, if we're native English or native Spanish speakers, then we can sort of pick those words up, and not only are they perfect in the Luchador Mouse canon, but they're real words in another language that maybe you can expand upon if you decide to keep going down that road and learn more about that culture.
I think you've made a very valid point there as well. Like you say, there isn't many people who would hear the word Muggle and kind of be confused. Like J.K. Rowling did invent a language within her books that so many people have come to understand. And another kind of the website does talk about some great authors in comparative to the books, such as, it talks about, for example, the works of Dr. Seuss, and with that in mind, there is a Cat in the Hat adaptation in the works, or at least rumored to be. And so with that in mind, have you ever given any thought to what an adaptation of Luchador Mice would look like, if that would be a movie, a TV adaptation? Have you kind of, because we've, JayBee and I've written a lot quite as well. I'm sorry, falling over my words here. JayBee and I have written a lot in our kind of spare time and things like that as well. And I think we always kind of visualize things in our mind of what they would look like when you're writing. And like you say, for you, it came from that comparison of seeing those two things together. So have you given any thought to what it would look like if it was adapted?
Yeah, I would love for it to be a television series, and there's so many options. Like I say, once you go down the road of everything has a personality, every creature has a personality, and giving those personalities a voice and a costume and an action, that there's an opportunity to travel our team of Luchador Mice. In the book, there's a little bit of a B story, and I don't know, or maybe I'll have to send you a copy. I don't know how deeply the website goes into it. I haven't looked at it, the website. I've looked at the book plenty. I haven't looked at the website that often since I authored it. But there's a B story of Guapo, who's a lizard, who really wants to join the Luchador Mice. So also to that point of inclusion, and we're all here to have fun, and we're all here to be lucha libre wrestlers. And so it doesn't really matter what your color or your creed or your religion or your species are. Please come and join us in this very fun thing that we're doing, which is sort of my personal credo. And as to the point of the adaptation, I originally wrote it with a television series in mind, and the first book, I'm working on the second, was in fact started with the theme song, where I created a theme song that sort of introduced the rules of lucha libre and the rules of the world of the dormice who were wrestlers, and took out the chorus for purposes of the book and made some adjustments so it had a little tidier beginning, middle, and end, and then added the little B story of Guapo, which was a little bit of a Mercer Mayer inspiration. Mercer Mayer has in the Little Monster books a Zimperumpa-Zoo that's like a different little furry critter, a little bit like Mowgli, like the fuzzy gremlin, but small, that pops up in the book. And you can kind of, you read the story, but you turn the pages and you look for the little Zimperumpa-Zoo, or for the rock cooties. There's rock cooties as well, to throw out a bunch of other words that only come into the lexicon if you read those stories. But I wanted to have a little bit of something extra on each page that you could explore and enjoy. And then in this case, I think it has a big payoff at the end, because I hate to spoil the book for anybody, but because Guapo is invited to join them, he goes on this journey and then gets to join the team. And in the television adaptation, we can travel all over Mexico, all over Central America, all over South America, all over the United States. Maybe we get on a boat or a plane and go wrestle with sumo wrestlers in Japan, or with, other WWE wrestlers in the United States, or Muay Thai in Thailand, and just explore. And I think the idea specifically, Muay Thai might be a smidge out of the realm of this, because specifically with WWE, it's entertainment wrestling, and people get hurt by virtue of doing stunts, but no one is hurting one another. It's, the person who's the quote unquote victim is selling the move. And so I explore that pretty strongly in the book as well, that this is a form of entertainment. And even though in the ring, we're putting on a show that's a that's a little bit of a battle of good versus evil. When we leave the ring, we all take care of each other.
Oh, that sounds amazing, and certainly sounds like such a fun read as well. Like you say, there's kind of endless possibilities there of the journeys and things they can go on together. And with that in mind, that a lot of our audience are aspiring writers, and do you have any advice for people who want to get into writing, be it for teleplays or books?
Yeah, I would definitely say keep creating content. And I mean, that's something I struggle with a little bit as well, not creating it, but executing it and putting it out there, because I think most of us who have a writer's brain are coming up with ideas every day, many times a day, frequently, and it's hard for me certainly to focus and follow and one idea to fruition when you have 10,000 ideas. And so I think, especially for me personally, smaller projects, like I wouldn't certainly call the book small, but affordable. I illustrated it myself as well, or, I also have lots of illustrator friends. I'm actually working on 2 other books with different collaborators that are not in the Luchador Mice canon, because, our time, while extremely valuable, is free for us to use. And so if you can create something, like if you're looking for one of your 10,000 ideas to focus on, I would try to pick something that you have the resources already to bring it to fruition, even if it's a 10-minute film instead of a 2-hour film, or it's a 26-page book instead of your 300-page novel, because you have your keyboard in front of you. You have so many options now that the internet connects us all so thoroughly, like it's doing just here on this episode, to find a printer or reach out to publishers, or air it on YouTube, or air it on TikTok, or air it on Amazon and do a pay-per-view. So I think just trying to find the things that you can create and share is really helpful. And then, continuing to get in touch with the people that you admire and the people who you think you might be a good fit with for employment, because, we all want to make money from our creativity as well. And it gives you, if you do both of those things of trying to reach out and chat with people who are in your field, and then also creating things, then when you reach someone, you can say, here's this great thing I created, may I share it with you? And hopefully that'll, bring about some serendipity, that you're both on the same page, you both have the same sense of humor, or the same enthusiasm for lucha libre, or enthusiasm for biculturalism. And then maybe you can go down the road of working on something together. One of the books I'm working on right now, I'm working on with a producer named Jenny Lou Tugin, who is notable for having produced Lethal Weapon and Free Willy, Radio Flyer, and a lot of features. She's working on a feature film right now, and she's collaborating with George Takei on her feature. And I'm collaborating with her on a children's book, because we sort of met, through a variety of industry connections or industry events, and became friends, and didn't have anything specific to work on for a long time. But then she had this children's book idea. So now she and I and our beautiful friend Miranda are working on this new book together.
Well, that was such great advice and very motivational. You wrote the Be Cool Scooby Doo episode Naughty Your Eyes, but prior to this, how familiar were you with the Scooby franchise?
Oh, how familiar with the franchise. I was very familiar with the really early episodes. They have a very, very strict formula, and to the point I was making about trying to do things on a budget, or do things that you already have the resources for. It's funny to note that in the original Scooby, and in a lot of those original animations, they have scrolling backgrounds. So they'll draw, 24 inches of background that will essentially keep passing them every time they're running through the scene, which I think is really interesting. That, a lot of those early animators and early puppeteers like Henson, they're very, very famous now, but they were real scrappy when they started out with their early projects. But I really enjoy the early Scooby-Doo, and it has that very strong formula, right? The mystery that we all love, and the different red herrings and different suspects that you want to follow, and they're proven not to be the bad person, the baddie in this scenario. And of course, the if it weren't for you meddling kids is so classic, which is why in my specific episode, despite having a very strong formula that I wanted to honor and follow, I had the opportunity to sort of flip it around and make one of the gang the suspect. So that was really fun for me to take the canon that I do know pretty well. I won't say I know it as well as you guys. I see all of your Scooby merch behind you, and I believe that you are aficionados. I haven't followed all of the many iterations of Scooby, but it was really fun for me to get to play with the formula.
Well, your episode never fails to crack me up every time I watch it. It's brilliant. But how did you come to work on Be Cool Scooby Doo?
That was actually through a connection from Second City, the Second City Comedy Theater and Teaching Theater. I studied writing at Second City in Chicago, which is an excellent program. And then I was in the conservatory, Second City Conservatory, which is sort of a improvisation to sketch. And I'd done a lot of improv previously as well with Unexpected Productions in Seattle, where I'm from and where I am right now, actually. And the Upright Citizens Brigade, UCB, and IO, originally Improv Olympic. We refer to them all with acronyms so often I had to think for a second what the heck those acronyms stood for. But there's all these really great improv theaters that are such good communities, and they're so fun just to go hang out as you take classes or just go see shows. I was a work study intern so that I could affordably pay for my conservatory, which also meant I was essentially at the theater, 5 or 6 hours, many days of the week, maybe not every day, but you just get to know everybody in your community by hanging around your community. And I mean, this is true for any job or any passion. And when people know what you're excited about, then when they get a job, friend of a friend, and the person who hired me is Jon Colton Barry, who's a brilliant story editor and producer and writer who does a lot of great animation. And he and I have worked with lots of Second City people. So I think it's very helpful to just keep making friend connections without too much of an agenda, because when you know someone well, then you know what they're perfect for. And then when something comes up, like I've had the opportunity to hire my good friend Jill on a number of my projects. She's in Canada, lives in Canada, but she's a brilliant writer. And we met at Second City, Chicago. So I think it's very hard to, especially with the creative brain, it's hard to send a resume across the internet and get an interview and sit with someone you've never met before for half an hour and explain your whole vibe, or have them really understand who you are and what your creative brain is like. But when you hang out with someone in a venue like Second City, or I'm a member of the Magic Castle, so I get to hang out with lots of cool magic nerds, or in a music environment and any sort of environment that's related to your passion, then you all sort of, have each other's best interests and have each other's backs. So it's really helpful in forwarding those jobs, and then also in passing down those jobs when I have the opportunity, which is one of my favorite things.
Oh, I see. I love that. I think like Jon Colton Barry, as you say, such an impressive filmography, but I also really love the testimony from him that was on that Sneaky Varmint website. It's just, it speaks so highly of you, and I think that it's completely well deserved. But in terms of that kind of interaction on Be Cool Scooby Doo, was he your main point of contact or liaison when working on that, or did you interact with some of the other cast and crew that were involved with that series?
He JCB, he usually goes by JCB, was definitely my main point of contact. And we broke the story together. I was the writer on that episode, and he was the story editor on the show. And I did have another writer whose name is escaping me this minute. I'll try to remember it so I can shout him out. But we all sat around on couches in John's office, JCB's office, for a little while and sort of jammed on the the formula and the canon of Be Cool specifically. You know, it's not, I wouldn't call it edgy, but it's certainly a little bit edgier than the original, which is very light, and it had some more character development than the original. For instance, Daphne, who I got to play with significantly, was sort of a me, really, now that I think more about it, of being so enthusiastic to try everything and almost learn a new thing every episode of Be Cool Scooby Doo, or at least get into a different style of shenanigan, because she just has so much inspiration, and so much energy, and so many ideas. And I think in that way, as I was mentioning before, Daphne and I probably both have a hard time in this canon, the Be Cool canon, of sort of focusing up and sticking to one thing, which is, you know, has its pros and its cons, of course. But yeah, JCB and I really sat together and broke the story. I came in with a bunch of ideas, or I probably emailed him a bunch of ideas, and the one that he loved the best, which was sort of the Daphne heist, and also the Iceman. We sort of talked about, you know, monsters. What would the monster be? And since they had episodes in the works and episodes they'd already done, we had to also be careful not to repeat monsters. So we had to sort of cross some monsters off the list. And then JCB likes to walk with a stick when he's thinking, like a little bit of a cane, but just to tap, like you'd imagine, you know, Churchill or someone walking around with his riding crop and just like tapping on things, thinking of things, putting together big ideas. And so we basically paced around his office for a couple hours together, walking with sticks. He has a spare so that I could have one. So walking around with our canes, tapping and thinking and shouting out ideas and telling jokes and doing bits and eating snacks, and sort of got the whole outline sorted. And then I went home and wrote an episode.
That's amazing. I'd love to almost be like a fly on the wall, you know, to witness that kind of session there. But in that session in particular, for the Naughty or Ice episode, was it the case where say he would pitch the story idea, then you'd write the teleplay, or did you kind of come up with the concepts and, you know, then ran with that teleplay yourself?
Well, I came up with the concept in particular, and I still haven't been. I've been to Stockholm, but I have not been all the way north to the Ice Hotel in Sweden. And so when I was sort of, like, in the way that I combined the Dormice and the Lucha Libre wrestlers for Luchador Mice, I sort of started thinking, you know, if I staged a Scooby episode, if I staged a mystery with our mystery gang, what sort of locations, what sort of monsters. And, you know, so I basically brainstormed, you know, by myself in my pajamas, a bunch of fun locations, basically places that I would want to visit. Because again, in animation, you can just be at the Ice Hotel. You know, someone abundantly talented, of course, has to draw it and paint it and make it beautiful. But we don't have to put everybody on a plane to Sweden and put everyone, you know, on a train and snow plow and dog sled and whatever it takes to actually, you know, get out there to this very cold venue and then put up a cast and crew in an Ice Hotel, which putting up a whole cast and crew in a regular hotel is difficult enough. But in animation, it's like, oh, great, we're at the Ice Hotel, hooray! And got to explore all of the fun things that can happen in a giant building made entirely of ice. And then same with the monsters, thinking of like, what are all the different monsters we can have and what's fun to play with. And then with the characters, as I mentioned, they all have, you know, Velma has a little more assertive practicality in this canon, and Fred is a little more strongly the leader, organizer, voice of reason. Scooby and Shaggy are always going to be Scooby and Shaggy, running from monsters and looking for snacks, which we love about them. One of the things with this canon is Scooby only ever says 4 words at a time. So in the episode, we had to cut down anything we wanted him to say to be simpler or to be said in a different line. And then Daphne, of course, is just a fireball. And so I kind of started taking all of those location, monster, and character plot lines or mystery specifically, and sort of putting those together in potential story ideas. And then, as I said, JCB sort of went through those, was like, well, we've already used this monster, so we've got to throw that idea out. And we've already used this location, or we're working on something with this location. And so we narrowed it down to sort of those three things, right? Person, place, and mystery. And then we together outlined the beats of the story.
Wow. And so how long did the process of getting this episode together take, from the initial brainstorm to meeting with Jon Colton Barry to then writing the episode in full?
I mean, in total, it was probably 4 to 6 months. There's a lot of in-between time, I think, there, because, we had an early meeting of like, we'd love for you to write an episode. We'd love for you to come be on the show. And I had hopes, and always have hopes. This is one of the tricky things about being a writer, is if the show gets canceled, then you don't get to keep writing on it, however much fun everyone had as a team. So it would have been really nice to have been on the next season, which unfortunately didn't happen. But anyway, we had sort of the initial interview, as it were. We knew each other, but we didn't know each other in terms of writing together. And then with another writer, and brainstormed through or talked through all of the things that were true of this version of the Scooby world. And then I probably went home for about 2 weeks in between to brainstorm all these ideas. And I do a lot better with the change of venue. So going to coffee shops, going to the Magic Castle, going to Second City, walking in the Arboretum, and just like thinking of things and trying to come up with ideas that were exciting to me, and emailing back and forth with JCB. And then I went in and we walked around with sticks and thought about the beats of the story and outlined it. And that was, probably 3 to 4 weeks to get all the way through the outline. And then I probably had, 4 to 8 weeks of writing and revisions. So I wrote an episode, and something that I always do, which I would also highly recommend, because it's equal parts helpful and delightful, is even if you're not, excuse me, even if you're not required or expected to have a table read, which is common for a lot of shows, episodic shows, to have table reads built into their process. And we did not have a table read built into the writing process for Be Cool Scooby Doo, but all of my friends are delightful comedy people, and many of them are also Second City people specifically. So I basically just get a bunch of wine and cheese and crackers, have everybody over to my house, and assign everyone a part, and we read it together, which is, a laugh riot. I get notes from 15 people who I trust implicitly. I always ask people, and I think as a bit of maybe unsolicited advice that I would dispense, is when you're getting notes, to ask for the notes you want, and not to be too precious, but don't just say, give me notes, because I think it's really easy to, hurt our egos a little bit if people are hollering out things they just hate, or things that they don't like, in a way that sounds like that, oh, I don't like this, or this was dumb. Nobody needs that kind of feedback. It's not helpful. But feedback like, if you want to tag this joke, I think this tag would be really funny. Or I was confused by why the monster was at this place and this time, but I think you could quickly explain it with a line such as, he ran to the pantry, no way. There's a lot of good constructive ways to give feedback, but there's also constructive ways to ask for feedback. Like, I always ask people if there was something that confused them, because if they didn't understand it, that is my fault, and I should fix that. But I want to hear it in a way that's helpful, not a way that bums me out, because we're all here to write comedy. So we want it to be fun. So I'll always go down that road of asking, what you loved, what was confusing to you, where you thought things could be either explained better or boosted in terms of the comedy or the exposition. And then when I get specific feedback from people, I can, do a back and forth with them and say, well, what if I had Daphne say this thing, then would that explain it for you and sort of solve that? And so then I'll do a revision of my own, send it to JCB or whoever my story editor or whoever my liaison is, which, depending on the show, frequently is the story editor, and sometimes I'm the story editor. And then my liaison would be like the producer or the director or whoever's giving network notes. It sort of depends on how big the machine is for the particular episode or project that I'm working on. And so then JCB, another revision, and then he usually, or many story editors will end up doing their own revision without me at the end. Like the beginning of my episode, I had a very wild transportation, as I was sort of describing about the ice hotel of planes and trains and dog sleds and paragliding and like all of these things was my original opening. But for budget and animators' time, drawing 7 modes of transportation is much more difficult than having everybody in a room doing fun puns. So we made a revision in that way for budget and for the respect of the animators' hard work, and saved the zaniness for the episode instead of having such a high budget, heavy resources cold open.
That's really interesting. It's always, really interesting to hear about how ideas get, refined down and how the project initially started off, and then always important to have that kind of collaborative feel and, moving things forwards. And I guess, like you said, you'd seen some of the original episodes of Scooby before this. So going into it, was there any particular character or any particular kind of Scooby formula? I know you mentioned kind of the meddling kids moment and things like that you were particularly excited to explore.
Well, I think it's true in a lot of television worldwide, and specifically historically, I think it's improving now, that women don't get as much autonomy or as much time to play as their characters even. And so I definitely knew that I wanted to play more with Daphne and Velma, and then knowing in the Be Cool canon that Daphne was sort of the wild card, was really fun for me. And so I think that was really a lot of it was, I wanted to also represent myself a little bit. And as I mentioned, I think Daphne and I sort of have a bit of a like-mindedness. And so having the women of the episode, and in Be Cool specifically as well in that canon, they get tennis shoes, which is much more practical for running away from monsters. And, just a lot of things that made the women especially more visible, more interesting, more three-dimensional, have more fun for themselves in the episodes. And so I think that was a lot of it as well, is just trying to boost their stories and let them have some fun.
Well, their story arcs in the episode were brilliant, comedy gold. At the time of writing the episode, were you aware of where it would be placed in the series?
Aware of its place in the series?
Yeah.
As far as the order that it would?
Yes, yeah.
Not really. I think with the show like Scooby Doo, it's convenient that it's not specifically serialized. And I think this is true of almost all mystery shows, procedurals and the like. I mean, Scooby Doo is really just the funnest procedural, right? It has a very clear formula. And I think I would have, frankly, a little bit of a hard time writing for a dramatic procedural, but also because I'm maybe just a little too zany to not be bouncing off the walls in something that was so deep and serious as one of those types of procedurals. But because of that, they can all get rearranged, and they frequently do all get rearranged. So I think I had an idea of when it was going to air and where it was going to fall, but I didn't really know until it did air, because there's so many, you know, a project as large as Scooby requires many artists, right? From the writers to the voice actors to the animators to anyone doing background cleanup, editing, and then of course all the producers and accountants and the support team to the artists. You know, producers fall under both categories frequently, so they're doing double duty. But in order to put things out in a timely way, which you have to do when you've promised your audience that there's going to be an episode at every interval, sometimes you have to rearrange the order of those episodes because someone wrote a cold open with 7 modes of transportation that the artists have to draw. And that's, you know, that's why my cold open got revised. But I think things also get rearranged because of people's schedules, the difficulty in creating a specific animation. There's, you know, all kinds of reasons because there's so many voices involved in the show.
When the episode aired, were you able to watch it, and what was the experience like to watch the final outcome?
I was able to watch it, and that's nice. There's a lot of times that things, especially when, you know, because this was an episode, it was easier for me to sort of put it on my calendar. Some of the other shows where I worked on every episode, like Idiot Test or Sex Sent Me to the ER, it's a little harder to catch every one. But yeah, it's very fun to watch it. It was really nice to have the table reads, which is always one of my favorite things, because even if they're not necessary, like I said, you get so much good, helpful feedback, but also have a whole bunch of fun with your talented friends, which is brilliant. But in watching it, there's always things that are really exciting because they came out exactly the way you wanted, and things where you're like, I wish that had come out exactly the way I wanted. But it's still so exciting to see it all come together in real life. I almost wish that it was even more of a surprise, but I think because I play my episodes so many times in my head, you know, when I'm conceiving them, when I do a table read, when I'm writing them, when I'm revising them, and then when I'm just thinking about them after they're all turned in, and even after I've received my paycheck, play it so many times in my head that the episode as a whole, it's nice to see it in real life, but it feels like I've seen it. And the things that I love the best are those little surprises that I didn't see in my head because they were added by the story artists or by JCB or by the producers, that were just little touches, like, you know, the way that Daphne might move, like at the beginning. I don't think it's actually at the beginning. I think it's somewhere in the middle where she's sort of laughing off that she might be up to something, but, you know, she's doing little back rolls behind columns and tying the rope across the room while all the while she's sort of laughing off and poo-pooing the idea that she could possibly be doing anything. And so moments like that, or the moment when Iceman eats his deodorant, which I'd written in, but the way that they chose to frame it in the camera was so funny to me, that it's really those little extra touches that the artists down the line added that I don't get to see until it airs, that really surprise and delight me.
Oh, see, that's amazing. I don't know if I'm outing myself as like a bit of a simpleton that can't figure out a Scooby-Doo episode, but it did surprise me when I first saw it, because I was convinced that it was the lady that could like unstick people's tongues, and that's how, like, that was the clue that she was good with ice, so that's why the monster wasn't like skidding around the floor and stuff. So it definitely was a surprise to me. But you mentioned prior that if Be Cool Scooby Doo had gone to a 3rd season, the chances are that you would have written more episodes and stuff like that. But in terms of season 2, did you go into it with the knowledge that it was going to be that one singular episode for that series?
Yes and no. I mean, I guess I went into it with the knowledge because I was contracted for just that single episode. And when I came on, the season was pretty pretty far underway. I can't remember the exact number of episodes of the season, but I know that about 2/3 of the season was already behind us. And so I knew that there weren't a lot of episodes to be authored in season 2. And there are a number of writers. So the the episodes sort of get divvied up amongst the writers in the crew. So I knew that for season 2, it was likely I was secured to write this episode, and it was likely that if I did get another episode, it would be maybe one, because we were so far toward the end of the season. So, I try not to hold my breath, because things get rearranged so frequently. I mean, executives between all the studios play musical chairs a lot. And in fact, there are lots of shows that are, developed by DreamWorks and then get produced by Sony and then get distributed by Disney somehow. And I'm not really sure how all of those, the business moving parts work. I try to stay a little bit abreast of it, but that's not the fun part for me. So all of those executive decisions are a little bit of a mystery. And sometimes they're a mystery even to the showrunners or even to the executive vice presidents, because like I say, there's so many moving parts and so much money getting spent and rearranged and hopefully made that it's just very, very hard to predict. Currently in Hollywood, I'm very frustrated, more on behalf of a lot of my friends, because fortunately this isn't my personal experience right this moment, but there are a lot of shows being renewed and pre-produced and produced and even all the way to post-production right now, and then being canceled. So they've been basically made and then not aired. And as an artist, that's just gut-wrenching to spend, you try not to get, you want to be excited about the fun things you're working on, but I try not to get too convinced until I get to see them, because I don't want to get too disappointed. And that's a real foible of mine, is I'm highly prone to disappointment. So I try to set my expectations so that I don't have too big a letdown. And then that means when it does air, then I can have all the excitement of all those like little touches. And so, yeah, I knew that I was contracted for the one. I was hoping for another one in season 2, and I was cautiously optimistic, because I knew that the team and I got along well, and I know that my episode was well received. So if there had been a season 3, then I would have very likely done several episodes, and that would have been very fun. But the consolation is that JCB and I are still friends. We're still finding things to work on. I have a great episode that had the resources to produce this really extraordinary high budget episode of television that I can share with people. Like I said about creating things, when you don't have that budget, you have to create it on your own. But when you do, it's so nice to be able to say, oh yeah, just please watch my episode of Be Cool Scooby Doo, and you'll get a good glimpse into my comedy brain.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, there is such, like, I guess more recently now, it's been like a trend thing with Warner Brothers. So far, we're aware of 2 whole feature-length Scooby-Doo projects that have just been cancelled. So there's so much of that going on at the moment. But like, speaking of things that JCB has worked on, there is some positivity in that, I think, and I don't know who exactly the crew is behind this, but there's like a Phineas and Ferb revival going on. And so if there was a Be Cool Scooby Doo revival and you were hired on to write more episodes, I mean, do you have some type of, I guess, story ideas or monster ideas that you'd like to explore in those?
Because I've switched on to different projects, and Be Cool hasn't been revived yet, or at least not in a way that I've been involved in. So a lot of times projects sort of like fly under the radar while they're experimenting with will they or won't they, build them into something larger. I kind of put the Scooby brainstorming aside, because as I've mentioned, my trouble is with focus. So I've tried to focus more on the Luchador Mice and the book that I'm writing with Jenny Lee Tugin and Miranda Robin. I think I failed to mention her last name. Miranda Robin is the other delightful creator behind my upcoming book. But in terms of Scooby, being you guys are Scooby fans, I think also as an avid traveler myself, that exploring locations is always really interesting to me. I've been to 44 countries now. I'm trying to get to every country in the world at least once. There's so many interesting things to see. So I think, Africa, which is one of the continents I haven't been to. I haven't been to Africa or Antarctica yet. There's so many interesting places in Africa. Giraffe Manor, especially. It's in Kenya, in Nairobi. I'm a huge fan of giraffes. It's a very expensive resort, which is why I haven't been yet. But it's just a preserve for giraffes, and they just have giraffes hanging out, stealing your waffles at breakfast and, living on the grounds. And so, I mean, that's a delightful place that I would love to visit personally, but would also be a really fun place for an episode. Whenever you have these sort of grandiose locations, it gives you so many things to play with. And especially, again, it really depends on the canon of the show. Like I wouldn't say in Be Cool current canon that the giraffes would be talking giraffes, but maybe in the future canon, the giraffes and Scooby can talk to each other. And so it just gives you all these opportunities to be weird, which is my favorite way to be. So yeah, just more brainstorming.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound amazing. And as you were mentioning there, you do have another upcoming book. So do you have any other projects as well that you have upcoming that you can tell us about?
Well, I've been working on a kids science podcast that's ongoing. That's really fun. It's called Who Smarted. And I know for sure it's available on Apple Podcasts. I think it's pretty much on all the podcast platforms, but that's where I listen to my episodes. And that's a really fun one. It's made by Atomic Entertainment in New York. And they are also continuing to develop other projects that are fun, narrative education, so that you sort of get that proximity education without having to literally study a list in a book. Like I just sent my episode about the periodic table to my neighbor and friend Becky, because she was just talking about wanting to brush up on her chemistry. And I was like, well, let me send you this kids episode, because even when I write for kids, and I hope that this came through in my episode of Be Cool, I try to put a lot of Easter eggs for adults and a lot of fun things that the adults can all appreciate as well, so that everybody can sit down and watch it together and have a good time and find something that's fun for them. So I think that's true in Who Smarted as well. Even the adults will learn a lot of tidbits. I also really like my episodes on pirates and Bigfoot. A really nice thing about this project is it's a much smaller team. And so I can almost write about anything I want. I mean, I have to pitch it to them and make sure, again, that they haven't done it already, or they're not doing it, they're not currently in production on an episode. But nearly all of my episodes were my ideas, which also meant they took a long time to write, because I went down a research rabbit hole that wasn't really necessary for the job, but was just exciting for me. Like, it's fun to learn about pirates. So spent a couple days learning about pirates. And then I have two books I'm working on, Niceness Gnomes, which was a concept of my mom's when I was a kid. So my mom and I are actually writing that together. And then I have a delightful illustrator, Frances, in the Netherlands. Took me a second to think of where she was located, because we communicate over the internet so much, who is working on the illustrations with me. I have a pilot episode of an animated show called Techtopia, and I'll try to link you. I know I have some web presence for that, but I think the site might currently be down. I might need to renew the web hosting or something. But Techtopia, which I'm working on with producer Kevin Glickman and animator in Argentina named Matthias, who's brilliant. And that one is about a family. I mentioned, if you could talk to all your gadgets, that one's about a family of gadgets. The father's a fax machine, the mom's a pager, and the kids are a flip phone and a smartphone. And they get rejected from the metropolis of Techtopia, where everything is brand new and fancy and shiny technology. And they have to go to the suburb of Passé, where all the old gadgets live. So they live together in a town along with people in sort of the way that the Muppets, the Muppets would, where the Muppets and people are on sort of equal status. So the gadgets and the people are sort of colleagues instead of being owned or simply operated. They're sort of employees or colleagues of one another. But the Finkelstein family, Fax and Paige and Flip and Lunia, live in Passé, along with the Mayor Slide Rule and their older parents that are like dial rotary telephones, and the Morse code pad, which is the great grandfather. So just all the gadgets have their own agency and their own personalities. And we've animated the whole 10-minute pilot. I'm just in the process of writing the musical score right now. We just put in all the sound design. And so that one should be out pretty soon this year.
Wow, that does sound incredible. And where's the best place for people to keep up with your work and new projects?
The simplest place is sneakyvarmint.com is my website, and I try to keep it up to date. I'm on Instagram pretty frequently, although I don't post as many project details there as I maybe should. But if you just want to keep up with my zany adventures on Instagram, I'm Sneaky Varmint there as well. I'm pretty much Sneaky Varmint all over the whole internet. So the easiest way to find me is probably to Google Sneaky Varmint.
Oh wow, that's incredible. I'll definitely be sure to leave that in the description down below for people to follow, because like just what you were saying in general, like, I really want to keep up with that. That just sounds so creative and incredible. So I'll definitely be sure to include that in the description. And yeah, I think that's all the questions that we had for you today. I just wanted to thank you so much for joining and being so generous with your time. It's been so incredible to hear about all these stories. So thank you so much.
Yeah, may I add an addendum in the spirit of connecting with the people you're really excited to connect with, and you all are really lovely, and thank you for having me. And maybe there's some people that I'm excited to work with on your side that either or I can shout them out, and maybe that'll help. One of my strange goals this year is to find a way to get on Taskmaster. Are you guys familiar? It's one of my absolute favorites. I would be so thrilled to work with Alex Horn in any capacity, or any of 8 out of 10 Cats. I love watching 8 out of 10 Cats do Countdown. I love Would I Lie to You? So if there are any of those shows, that's where I'm trying to like reach out in my circle. There's so much British comedy that I am such a huge fan of, and would just love to be involved in any of that fun, weird work that's happening. So if anybody hears of it and wants to message me at Sneaky Varmint, then maybe that'll help me with my future fun career comedy goals.
Oh yeah, that sounds amazing. Definitely the British comedies, they're kind of in full fruition right now. So it's definitely a good time to kind of be on that. Let's manifest that. Thank you so much. And I guess thank you so much to everyone for watching this and for keeping up with every episode every week. It does mean a lot to us. And of course, we'll leave a link to Sophie's Instagram in the description down below. Incredible Scooby-Doo artwork. I wish that I could string together a stick figure, but I can't. So if you want some artwork, that's the place to go. And of course, I'll link to you for everything that we're doing. So if you want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.